Yesterday and today, I watched a very, very, very interesting video. It was a debate between none other than Candace Owens. You guys have probably heard of this girl. If you guys don't know who Candace Owens is, she is an African American lady who actually voted. Hey, what's going on, Florin? Who voted for Obama twice, and then later on in life, later on, like her late 20s, she became a kind of a conservative. She took on conservative principles, and ever since then, she's kind of been running around, and she's been basically talking to African American people all over the place, and she's been saying, "Well, listen, guys, like." I get it. We're not all criminals. We're not all bad people, but we have to get our act together. We have to stop, venerating the, as it were, dregs of our society. We have to stop striving for more than what we strive for. And for saying these things, which are basically things that are kind of similar to what Bill Cosby was saying before he had to go to prison, she was lambasted by her community, ranging everything from you don't just air out dirty laundry, or what you're saying is true, but you don't just air out our dirty laundry, to why do you hate your own people so much? What does she come and say? She comes and she says things like, come on guys, let's stop striving to be athletes or rappers and venerating a certain culture, and let's go and let's strive to be I don't know, scientists, financial professionals, doctors, lawyers, etc., etc. Again, a lot of people really go off on her for this. So finally, after like a couple of years of like her basically being like chastised by her own people, and not only that, but chastised by left-wing people, commentators, she basically came out and she was like, hey, does anybody want to debate me? So finally, there's a gentleman, African American guy by the name of Mark Lamont Hill. He is a professor, I think at Temple University, if I'm not mistaken, in Philadelphia. And he said, okay, I'll debate you, and I'll debate you on the issues. And so he came on, and they started debating. You guys can watch it on PragerU on YouTube. They debated about everything from, you're talking about like affirmative action, to the George Floyd thing, to, they were talking about like the veneration of George Floyd himself. I was listening. There was an interesting back and forth. I guess Mark made valid points, Candace made valid points, and then they got to the topic of, transgender, and in particular, people being forced. And now we see that there was a whole story in Canada of people being forced to, by law, to call somebody by a particular pronoun. And if they don't, like, this person's liable to go to prison for not calling somebody. Like, if I come up to a person and tell them I want to be called, it's one thing if I want to be called, I don't know, Susan. It's quite another if I want to tell somebody, call me, Ze. And you have to. Like, you have no choice, right? If you don't, you're going to go to prison. That's already tyranny. So she was explaining that to Mark Lamont Hill, and Mark Lamont Hill, and they kind of went into the whole area of like basically he started saying this kind of old canard. I mean, it's not an old canard; it's actually a fairly new canard that's been coming out of the universities. These kind of half-baked professors. Basically, he's saying, well, he made the argument. He said, it depends on the setting. If I'm a light-skinned person in America, a light-skinned person in America will have a different experience than you would have in Africa and in Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and this and this and this and this. What does that mean? That means that race is a construct, right? Depending on where you are. So then he said the same can be true for gender. Gender is a social construct. And the thing is, Candace is sitting there and she's just like, no, what do you mean? I can't fathom what you're saying, la la la. And she's like, and intuitively, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, well, Candace, the thing is, I agree with you, but telling this guy that he's wrong and that's just saying that that's weird or that's off or that's crazy or that, you don't play that game is not an argument. And it got me thinking. It really got me thinking about society and where we're at today, where society is today, and really where is society? Society is at a point where it has discarded any semblance of, Torah principles, which I guess you could extend to, for the purposes of this, which I don't really like the term so much, but for the purposes of this illustration, I'll use the term Judeo-Christian values. When a society discards these values, then what happens is, oh, my friend is writing transgender law. Yeah, about a lot of transgender law. And what happens when you discard these things is that eventually society starts making up their own arbitrary rules, which are based on something called moral relativism. Not only moral relativism, but now we see we're in an era of what's called postmodernism. So it's funny, guys, I remember watching a debate. Actually, I attended a debate. I don't know if you guys remember, there used to be this brilliant writer. He's from England. He was from England. And he actually found out that he was Jewish later in life, which kind of like sent him like a little bit of a loop. And actually, I think it made him more of a militant atheist than he already was. His name was Christopher Hitchens. I'll tell you guys something. Christopher Hitchens was actually, when I first started writing, he was one of my literary, I guess, idols, or the people that I kind of strive to emulate as I was trying to kind of craft my own voice, in writing. But, and I used to listen to him, and I used to listen to him debate a lot of people. And he used to say in all of his debates, he would debate a lot of these theologians and a lot of these clerics, and even a couple of rabbis. And he used to say that, human beings intrinsically have it in them, inclinations, that we were born with kind of, he used the term scientific or biological inclinations not to murder and not to steal. Basically, all people are moral, unless, they put in a certain environment that they have to deviate from that morality, as it were, from that inherent human morality. So basically what he's saying is that he was a proponent of what's called secular humanism. And what's interesting, guys? He made, at that time that I was watching his debates, his lectures, you're talking like 10 years ago maybe, I remember sitting there and I was just like, he makes a point. I'm like, what do you, at the end of the day, there really is not a very strong argument, and again, this is before I knew Torah, there's not really a strong argument for the Torah being this is at that time, for the Torah being this barometer or the standard of morality. Because again, the Torah has in it things that are kind of problematic, right? At that time, this is what I was thinking, for our times, for our society, stuff like that. And then now you fast forward like 10 years later, we're in the era of transgender, we're in the era of, we just signed some laws, bills into law, that were passed as law. You're talking about gay marriage laws. And this is where we're at, my friends. And now we're at a point where you have college professors teaching people that gender is a social construct. In this debate, At one point, Candace Owens asked, what's his name, Mark Lamont Hill, can a man give birth? And he goes, well, it depends. Sometimes. And so she was like, well, if a man can give birth, then he becomes a woman. He's like, no, he's just a man who can give birth. So I'm just sitting there and I'm just like, I'm watching Candace, lose her mind over these statements, not being able to enunciate why it's a problem, that Mark is saying what he's saying. She's just saying like, well, that's crazy, and I don't play that game, and this and that. Yeah, I also think it's crazy, I also don't play that game, but I have my reasons. And I'll tell you what my reasons are. My reason is, and it's the reason of many people who understand this, once you discard the idea of a Torah, and the minute you discard the idea of a creator that created, a man and a woman, and okay, you can get into there's a story in the Zohar and the Kabbalah that before it was a man and a woman, it was one one androgynous being, and we split into two, and that's where you get the soulmates and the zivugim and all these things. Put that idea for a side, and actually we'll talk about that. Put that idea for a side just for a second. Once you discard the idea of a being that is outside of space and time, and who gave the Torah and these laws and created man and woman, once you discard that from society, it's really only a matter of time. And once you go into secular humanism, it's really only a matter of time. In this particular case, being 10 years, maybe 5, to where now you are sitting and society comes up with the idea that gender is in fact a social construct. These things are malleable, these things are fluid. You guys hear gender fluid. These things are non-binary. These things exist in the ether. They exist in the cloud. The cloud? We talk about the cloud? That's where they exist. They're nebulous. They're fleeting. They're floaty. Or as I like to call it, they're floaty nachlaoti, for my friends in Jerusalem. They're up there somewhere. In the cloud, floating away, floating around. There's no man, there's no woman. Men can give birth. Women can, I don't know what they can do. And that's it. My friends, how I know this whole thing is whack? If you go and you watch what's happening to the creator of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling, she came out and she said, well, listen, transgender, I don't want to misquote her. Basically, her idea is that transgenderism basically tramples on the rights of women. Because now if you're saying that, or rather, transgender rights, if you're talking about something like a gender neutral bathroom, or even a women's bathroom, a person, right? Let's say it's a man with a penis who he just says, I identify as a woman, and now I'm going to walk into a women's bathroom. So let's say he doesn't actually identify as a woman. Let's say he's pretending, and now he walks into a women's bathroom. He is endangering women, right? So my friends, we just had a women's march for women. The women's march was for women. They were angry at what Trump said. They put on these hats, whatever. So J.K. Rowling came out and she said, listen, if you're for women, you want to protect women, here's the pitfalls of this whole thing. And all these people came out and said, well, you're against transgender and this and that, you're just, this is a dog whistle. And my friends, so what happens is in a society where you've discarded the very idea of what gender is, that it's actually a real thing, and you turn it into a social construct, then you get into this whole balagan, this whole kit and caboodle, confused kit and caboodle, where people don't know you know one from their elbow, up and down, their left and their right, they don't know what's flying, and they're going to be coming and going. This whole thing has people coming and going. You come to them with logic, the logic is going to fly in the face of everything they know, and there's absolutely nothing logical about their theories, because again, their theories were created by men, were by fallible people. They were created, endowed by Hashem, by the Torah. And once you venture into that realm, And it's funny, guys, I remember like when they passed the gay marriage laws in New York, and I remember I was listening to the radio and whatever, some conservative radio host, and he was saying, you know, what's next? People marrying their dogs and this and that, and you know, it's a slippery slope. And I was like, come on, this is ridiculous. They just want to pass these laws, okay? I didn't think that what they were saying would be actionable, would actually come into reality. And now we're watching this, my friends, 10 years later, we're watching this just play out in like a 1984 bizarro world, Twilight Zone sort of way. Like it cannot get any weirder than this. Maybe it can, I don't know. We haven't seen anything yet, you know, for all I know. Maybe I'm underestimating the whole thing, you know? Or as George W. Bush would say, misunderestimating. You know, it's hard work being this crazy. Yeah, so you know, I was sitting there and I was watching Candace Owens lose her mind and flip out about what Mark Lamont Hill was saying, and I'm just thinking to myself, well, Candace, if only you understood that the answer is once you lose something, you lose the idea of what was endowed to us by our Creator, then it's a free-for-all. Then somebody like a Mark Lamont Hill or anybody else, any crazy professor on college campus, can in fact, he has a carte blanche, he can legitimately come and say that yes, gender is a social construct, because if you have all these things throughout, you know, the span of time, like gender roles and what women are more, let's say, inclined to do, you know, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, what women are inclined to do by biology versus what men are inclined. It's not a question of, you know, for example, you're talking about certain occupations, it's not a question of like women were denied to work in these occupations, just that women are not going to be, you know, there's not a lot of women running to be coal miners, right? You know what I'm saying? Or men running to do a particular job until recently, right? Or nursing, whatever it is. Because again, there's certain inclinations that men and women have that lead them into going to certain professions. Again, not to say that women can't do professions that men can, certain professions and vice versa, but again, like, these things are lost on people. Why are they lost on people? Because the more a society loses the plot when it comes to Hashem and the Torah, these things start to blur lines, and then you're getting into a situation of where you basically have this kind of Tower of Babel, and the people that are arguing the point of, you know, the fact that there are genders, people can't explain or verbalize properly why that is something that is why it's important. Why not only it's important, but why it's a real thing. You know, if you can't sit across from one of these professors who's saying that gender is a social construct, if you cannot bring your argument as to why that is, you know, if all you could say is this is crazy and I don't play that game and this is Looney Tunes, this is not, it is crazy. It's really crazy, right? For any normal person. Even a person who's like an atheist, right? People who don't believe in Torah and Hashem. For any just normal person walking down the street, you tell them, you know, you tell them these things, and they're just like, "What are you talking about? Gender's a real thing. There's man, there's woman, and like, what's up? Women give birth, man, you know, do what they do, and that's it." Apparently not. You know what I'm saying? Apparently not. And my friends, I'll tell you, I have to do a mea culpa. I really was one of these people sitting 10 years ago and listening to this intellectual talking about secular humanism and talking about this and talking about that. And I realized, you know, after all these years, I realized that that's the biggest load of horse manure I've ever heard in my entire life. My friends, once you discard Hashem, once you try to build this tower, you know, which unfortunately Western society has built over the last, I don't know, 10 or 20 years, then basically, you know, you lose the plot. And we see where we are with society, my friends. I mean, it's funny, and this goes into other facets of society. This goes into, now you're talking about, you know, people are tearing down statues, right? They're trying to erase history. Fine. Okay. So, here's the thing. Again, we go back into this idea of moral relativism and postmodernism. You know, it only applies, you only want to tear down the statues of the white guy who enslaved people. Okay, if you're upset at all slavery around the world, then go tear down statues of, I don't know, things relating to the Arab world who enslaved African slaves. Somebody posted a picture of the Dome of the Rock. The person that built the Dome of the Rock, I forget his name, it was part of the Umayyad Caliphate. And from the Umayyad Caliphate up until, basically the 20th century, even to today, we had, 17 million Africans over the span of like these, 1400 years enslaved by the Arab nation. Whether it was a caliphate or a country or some entity or a terrorist group, what have you, 17 million African slaves were enslaved by Arabs. My friends, so the people who built the Dome of the Rock, which stands in the place of our temple in Jerusalem, was built by slave owners. So now you want to get upset. And it's now actually occupied by the people who claim to want, what is it? What is it that they want? What's that word? What's that place? That place that never really existed, but kind of exists, but doesn't really exist, and goes to the UN and declares a state. What's that place? Palestine? So, my friends, we have to be consistent. If you want to tear down statues here, you have to tear down statues here, or landmarks here, or whatever it is. But the problem is they won't. Why won't they? Because it is, their whole thing, my friends, is something called self-serving. They are living in a moral, relativist, postmodern world. This is the world that they live in. And their whole agenda, their whole zach, as we say in Yiddish, is self-serving. Specifically, it serves to destroy, essentially the white man. That's really what their goal is. Destroy capitalist systems and destroy the white man. That's really the, so to speak, the worst thing that ever lived. The worst two things that ever were on this earth. Capitalism and the white man. That's it. So, my friends, this is what they decided. This is their firm belief. It is a religion, to the point where if you talk to them and you tell them, well, your beliefs are like this and this and this, and here's why your beliefs are wrong. My friends, have you ever met a person, a social justice warrior, or one of these leftists who has their firm beliefs, and you try to come to them and you try to convince them, or you try to poke holes in their beliefs, or you try to do what I just did? You know what they do? They react like any typical garden variety cult member. If you guys ever seen a cult member react to anytime you come to them and you poke holes in their cult, what the beliefs of their cult, they go crazy. They cancel you. They they block you on social media. First of all, before they do that, they insult you. They call you a name. Usually it's like racist or homophobe or transphobe or this. They'll label you some name, and then what they do is they cancel you, and then they run away. And then they block you. They don't even want to have a conversation because, my friends, they're in a cult, and if you're coming to break the cult, if you're coming to disband the cult with your logic and your facts, or as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings, well, he doesn't realize that the feelings come from the cult members. And the cult members, they're all into their feelings. And they have a feeling that, some cult master, some cult leader convinced them, usually was in some university, that these, principles are true, these maxims are true, and there's nothing else. There's no Torah, there's no Hashem, there is nothing. In these people's world, and it's funny because they come and they claim that there's a God. They claim they believe in a God, and that they believe, they want to send this person to hell, and they believe in a God, and they believe in this. And my friends, you know what always confused me? How could people, people who run these churches be, and if I come to them and I say, well, the Jewish people should belong in the land of Israel, and the cradle of Jewish civilization is Hebron, and Jerusalem, and Shiloh. And if you're a person of faith and you believe in the Bible, as it were, the Old Testament, if you've ever read a lick of it, you'll agree with me. But for some reason, these people, conveniently discard it. So that leads me to believe that they either don't know the Bible, or they just don't care about Hashem. It's just something that they use, a very nice, what's called buzzword, a nice selling point that they use to convey their fluffy ideas of, moral relativism and postmodernism. So, my friends, yeah, this is where we're at in society. And I'll tell you guys, I think the only solution for this, or the only cure for this disease, because it is a disease, society is diseased. As George Carlin used to say, we're all diseased. The only cure for this is the more and more people who actually come and say genuinely, not like in a crazy way, not like in a preachy way, but say, listen, if somebody asks you, from where do you get the idea that gender is a real thing, that there's a man and a woman? How dare you come at me with, this construct? Will you say, it's not a construct? I'm sorry to tell you. There's a creator of this universe, there's a creator of the world. He created man and woman, and all of these other things, my friends, I'll tell you guys, I'm just going to address it real quick. All these other things that you're talking about, transgender, all these other things. My rabbi, his name is Dror Moshe Kasuto, he speaks about, and I'll post a video so you guys can listen to it. He speaks about the idea, and it's actually a very, very controversial idea in Judaism, but it's an idea that exists, and it comes a lot from the Zohar, from Kabbalah, that and I say this statement very, very, take this sentence with a grain of salt. Creation is broken. You guys might think, what do you mean, Tzvi? What do you mean by creation is broken? Hashem is perfect. If Hashem created the world, how is creation broken? My friends, creation is broken. And human beings broke it. Something happened to us spiritually along the way to where now creation is broken, and now we have, I have friends, guys, that are Torah observant Jews who are homosexual and this, that, and the other, and they come to me and they say, Tzvi, I know that what I was born is, according to the laws of Hashem, there's something off. But at the same time, I can't stop being who I am. So these people understand, and we understand the creation is broken. But with that said, my rabbi explains, he says, when Mashiach is going to come, he's going to fix creation. He says, why do you guys think that, for example, if you look at the gay movement, right? The official gay movement, what is their flag? Their flag is the rainbow. So, if you guys look back at the story of Noah and the flood, what was the sign that Hashem gave that he's not going to destroy the world? He gave it to Noah. The sign was the rainbow. So I don't know if it was by design that the gay movement used the rainbow as their symbol. It's interesting, right? Don't you think? But my rabbi explains that, so now you see the gay movement, as it were, the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it, is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and yet the world is not being destroyed. We've gotten to a point, it's one thing, my friends, if you want to approve people in society, and this is where we get into, again, another problem of Western society, approval versus acceptance. If you want to say you approve of this person, if you want to say you have, some friend of yours comes and say, his name is Mike and now call me Susan and now call me Mary, fine, I approve of this person. Accept. Approval versus acceptance. But now you say, you have to approve me. How do you approve me? By signing it into law. That I can get married and stuff like that. These people can get married. That's when you get into a lot of trouble on a spiritual plane. And you guys might say, well, what do you mean, Tzvi? How do you quantify that? I don't understand what you mean. Listen, if you guys learn the Torah, you'll understand what I'm saying. Learn it in depth. Learn what's called Be'iyun, learn the Pnimius, learn Kabbalah and Chassidut. You'll understand what I'm saying. And my rabbi explains that once creation is going to be fixed, then we will understand what all of this was for. But until then, creation is broken, and it's not really up to us to judge people on a personal level. Again, we can accept them as human beings. We can accept them. It's fine. I accept everybody, but at the same time, it's one thing to accept people. It's quite another to approve of something, especially approve of it via legal mechanisms. It's two separate things, my friends. And it's interesting. One other point, to this whole gender, I guess, fluidity or whatever you want to call it. The Kabbalah actually talks about, and I mentioned this before, that Adam and Chava, before they became, man and woman, separate, they were one. It was like this asexual, as it were, being, right? It was this androgynous being. So it's interesting that we're having this whole situation. The closer we get to Mashiach and we see all the machinations that are happening, the stronger this movement gets. The problem is that they are running, as we say in Russian, they're running ahead of the locomotive, as it were. And again, when you're doing something just because this is how you feel or this is how you identify, based on some nebulous thing that you got from a college professor and gender studies and gender theory and secular humanism and moral relativism and postmodernism, that's when society starts breaking down and devolving into what we have today, my friends. That's really it. That's really it. But listen, there's a lot of connections here. It's not by accident that we're seeing all this stuff, and it actually is all connected to the story of Noah, the story of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, the stories that go back all the way to the creation of man, and we are coming full circle. It's almost like Hashem is bringing us full circle with all the stuff that you guys see happening. That kind of flies in the face of Torah, but it's funny because we can't escape the Torah ideas within everything that's happening. It just takes a certain lens to see what's going on, right? But to my original point, guys, if you can't verbalize why, you believe what you believe when it comes to, there's a man and there's a woman and all these kind of things, and if all you can do is just sit there and say, well, this is crazy and I'm not down with that. Yeah, it is crazy, and you're not, and I'm also not down with that, but we have to be able to verbalize. Because you know what, guys? When we verbalize our stuff, that stuff has been around since the dawn of time, and it's solid as a rock. And I'll tell you guys, it's way more solid than any half-baked professor can conjure up in his small little pea-sized brain. Alright guys, talk to you soon.